Welcome, everyone. This is the Valente Brothers podcast. We're here with Pedro Valente,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast once again.
Joaquim Valente.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So we're back for another episode. We're going to talk about our dear father, Grandmaster Dr. Pedro Valente. We decided to dedicate a full episode, which, by the way, won't be enough, to talk about our dad, his beginnings, some of our ancestry, and, of course, his life trajectory and how this helped us so much. So, Pedro, what can we start with?
Our father was born in Rio, and he comes from a family that originated in the northeast of Brazil, most specifically in the state of Ceará. And our father was very proud of his northeastern roots. He was the son of a doctor, Dr. Cilo Gomes Valente, a very wise and spiritual man who started him in the practice of jiu-jitsu. And our father was someone who loved history, who loved ancestry, and who loved learning valuable lessons from those who he admired, those who came before him. He was very proud of his roots. And I'm very excited to be able to talk not only about his trajectory, but also about his philosophy, which is so important in our trajectory.
I think we should mention his mother also, no? So, and also her family.
Go ahead.
Not from Ceará.
Absolutely.
You know more than I do, so please.
Yes, his mother, our beloved Vovó Temis, our dear grandmother who we were so close to growing up. She was born in Rio. Her mother was a piano player, piano teacher, a musician with French roots. And her father was from the northeast of Brazil as well, from the state of Pernambuco. And he was a...
Was he born in Pernambuco?
He was born in Pernambuco, yes. And he was extremely creative. He started his own company. He had his own invention. And they, both of them, her father, and they had many children. So she had many siblings, and she was a wonderful woman.
Yeah, Vovó Temis.
Yes.
Right? Very tough woman who I think our father shared a lot of her personal traits.
Yes.
Vovó means grandmother,
Yes.
right? In a caring way to say it's avó, but we call vovó.
Like grandma. Yes, and she, her temperament in many ways was similar to our father's.
So, Joaquim, what can you say about what you know about our dad's upbringing and his youth?
I think his youth was extremely important. He always had stories that he used to tell us about how his youth shaped the man he became and how many of the traits that he was so recognized for as someone who was eclectic and someone that was intense and, really dedicated himself to whatever he was trying to achieve. This idea that we have spoken before here in these podcasts of having a mission, right? And going after that mission with your full heart and really striving to be able to achieve it was something that I think he was born with that personality. And there are so many stories of him young and how he was dedicated in martial arts, in jiu-jitsu, in other activities. And my dad, I think, similar to me, we were from the same sign, Scorpio. He was someone that really enjoyed to tell stories, to be able to have a good time. He was a great storyteller, very descriptive, and that allowed us to be able to live many memories that were remarkable on his upbringing.
Yeah, I would also, like to add that. So our father was the first of two children. He was the oldest brother. His youngest sister was Gesilda, Tia Gesilda, and they lived. Our father was born in a neighborhood called Andaraí in Rio de Janeiro. Eventually, the family moved to Tijuca, or they were already living in Tijuca, and he was born in Andaraí, the hospital. Years later, our grandfather moved to Copacabana, and that's where he pretty much was raised. He started training in martial arts, organized martial arts. The first academy was a judo school when he was about 9 years old. And eventually, when he was between 12 and 13, that's when they joined the Academia Gracie in downtown Rio de Janeiro, 1953.
Yes.
His first jiu-jitsu instructors, I think we have to mention, were João Alberto Barreto, Robson Gracie, who was just a few years older than him. Hélio Vigio. We have his card with the classes. I don't know if he took classes with Carlson or Armando Vritti, maybe a few also. Yes. Those were the 5 main teachers under Hélio Gracie teaching at the time. And I remember that our father talked a lot about how when he was young, of course, very playful, like Joaquim mentioned, but he was not a very good student early on. And he was studying in a very nice private school. And our grandfather was not happy with his grades and threatened him to remove him from school if he did not improve his grades, and he would send him to a public school. And he always talked about how eventually there was a big click, and he started doing much better. And in Brazil, the school system is a bit different, but what would be equivalent to high school, that's when he started really organizing himself, learning how to study with the help, of course, of teachers. And our father, he really developed a sense of discipline, and that was very important for him because he was able to enter, at the time, the most prominent medical school, probably in South America. And the system in Brazil is different than the one used here in the United States. You need to pass a test called vestibular, and it's pretty much based on this test. And the top qualifiers, there's a certain number, and the ones that qualify among that number, they enter the university.
The ones that rank the best in that test.
Let's say they have 40 spots, so the top 40 enter that university. And that's how I think that was a very important step, right, in his life, especially in his medical history.
Yes.
What was the name of the university?
Faculdade Nacional de Medicina, the national medical school.
In Brazil.
And it was respected around the world. People would come from around the world to attend that university. It was considered one of the best medical schools in the world at the time, and our father was able, through that test, as you said, to
This is in the late 50s, early 60s. No?
Yes.
I think he graduated in 1963, possibly?
Yes.
Yeah.
But going back to his childhood, I think 2 stories come to mind. Number one, the story about the rifle, the pellet rifle that our grandfather let him borrow one time. You remember the story?
Yes. So our father, he talked a lot about this because it was a huge lesson for him, and it stayed with him for the rest of his life. He learned the concept of trust, and he had the rifle that was, of course, was it borrowed or maybe a present from our grandfather?
I think because, I think what makes sense more with the story is that it
was borrowed.
Yeah. Yes.
And a few weeks later, our grandfather asked for the rifle, maybe asked to have the rifle back. And our father said, Dad, I let one of my friends have it, and
borrow it.
Yeah. And Vovô Silo, my dad's dad, said, I trusted you with the rifle. I did not trust your friend. And he taught him that trust is not transferable.
Yeah, because our father said, no, I trust my friend. He's very trustworthy. And then Vovosilo said, no, you might trust him.
Correct.
But it's my rifle. So you cannot transfer that trust to somebody else.
Yeah, and he taught us that, and he remembered that story in so many different occasions. And that's so present in so many situations. I think that our friends can relate to this so much, right, Joaquim?
Yes, because, you know, I think a lot of times people don't put themselves in the position of understanding how much trust someone needs to have to be able to, in that case, lend him, you know, the rifle or even gift him the rifle, right? Because as a father, and I teach about firearms, as you guys know, it takes a lot of trust for you to be able to trust someone with a weapon, someone with a firearm. And when you say, look, I'm going to take that and I'm going to give it to someone else, right? It's the perfect example that trust cannot be transferable, because I trust you, but I don't trust the other person. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you don't trust them, but the only reason that you have this firearm because I trusted you, so you cannot do this.
And that has to do a lot, I think, with secrets, right? Somebody tells you a secret, and they're expecting to only tell you, and then you feel, oh, I can tell it to this other person because I trust this other person. That's not right, because the person who told you the secret doesn't necessarily trust that person.
Yeah, that's why in business you have to usually sign agreements, because no one, unfortunately,
about secrets, I remember
people don't trust each other, so you have to sign an agreement.
On secrets, I remember our dad speaking so much about how our grandfather, his father, right, would teach him that silence is golden, right? But the direct translation from the way that he used to say it in Portuguese was that a palavra é de prata e o silêncio é de ouro.
Right? Words are silver, but silence is gold.
And silence is gold. So,
yes. Another thing that came to mind when you were talking about the click that our father started doing better in school has to do with how he was such a prolific writer.
Can I then, I thought it was going to be a different story. Can I share another trust story that I think was also very important to him? So he, you know, we had a very different way. We still have a very different way in the way we share things as brothers, right? A lot of people find this to be very almost crazy.
Very
unique. But some accountants, I think, find it crazy. Some lawyers find it crazy. But we were raised in a way where we learned from our father to share everything. And we still do, right? We still have one bank account, right? And we share everything, and we have a trust that everyone is fair, everyone works as hard, and everyone just takes whatever they need, and we don't keep track, right? So our father said that one time he needed money, and our grandfather told him, go ahead, you know where my wallet is. Just go there, open the wallet, take whatever you need, and put the wallet back. And our father said, okay. So our father went, and the wallet was full of money. And he thought about it, and he's like, okay, I'm just going to take whatever I need right now. And it was a very small amount compared to how much money was in that wallet. When he came back, he thanked his father, our grandfather. He said, wow, Dad, thank you so much. You know, when I have children, I'm going to do the same exact way. I'm going to teach them the same exact way. I'm going to trust them like that. And our grandfather told him that you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to first meet them to then find out if you can trust them or not. So
everybody's different.
Because everybody is different. So, of course, what we were able to achieve is greatly, I think it was pretty much 90 or more percent because of his teachings. But our father, we know, and his father as well, they believed a lot in nature, not just in nurture.
Correct.
So it's a combination.
Yes, that's so important. And going back to the click, our father was a prolific writer. And I think that's something, a skill that he used his entire life to write letters and notes and thoughts. And growing up in our library, there was a compilation of short stories. Our father loved to write short stories, essays, when he was a kid, when he was a teenager. Fiction and non-fiction, short stories. And I was always so impressed with his handwriting, how beautiful his calligraphy was. And also, I remember being the same age when he wrote those stories and thinking, oh my God, his vocabulary was so good, his writing was so amazing. So I was always impressed at our father's intellectual prowess and his abilities in writing and his vocabulary and his knowledge about so many different things, not just medicine. Even though he was a surgeon, he knew medicine very well, all the different areas of medicine, and also about life, about history, about science, and so many areas.
So our father goes to medical school. He graduates. He has top grades. He actually always talked about how his highest grades were in psychiatry, and he decides to become a plastic surgeon. He was also influenced, and this is very interesting for our trajectory as well. He was influenced by a student at the Academia Gracie who was a very high level, a very recognized plastic surgeon in Brazil at the time, in Rio de Janeiro.
Dr. Jorge da
Silva, yes. And he goes on to become a great plastic surgeon, right? He achieved great success very quickly. Yeah. At the time, Brazil already had good plastic surgeons, but our father, who was younger than a name that is very recognized until today, Ivo Pitangui family. And our father, I think it's fair to say that even though he was younger, at one point, he was the #1 ranking plastic surgeon in Rio de Janeiro, right?
Yes, in Brazil.
In Brazil. And
people were coming from all over the world too.
Recognized all over the world, to the point that he was invited when the New York Times Magazine published a story. They invited the top doctors in the world, and top 5 doctors in the world, and our father was among them.
Yeah, and we should talk a little bit about his training as well, not just in Brazil, under the mentorship of Jorge da Silva, but also our father traveled the world to learn from the best plastic surgeons, and that's something that we learned from him. Our father always encouraged us to find out who are the best in any field and to learn from them. And he trained under Dr. Gustav Alfrich in New York City, who was considered the best plastic surgeon
who I'm sure
in
that
the world at the time.
Our plastic surgeon friends watching this, listening to this, I'm sure they know who Gustav Alfrich.
Especially because you have the Alfrich, one of the instruments is called the Alfrich. I forget exactly what it is.
Now that I speak a little bit of German, I think it's Alfricht. Gustav Alfricht.
And also he went to Europe and he worked in England, and they're very prominent doctors as well. So he really prepared himself before he went to Brazil, and he started on his journey as a plastic surgeon. And as I said, as you said, with great success at a very young age.
Yeah, he studied in England and in London and top schools in New York. I think he did courses in the New York University and Cornell.
Yes.
And in Paris as well.
Correct.
And he studied a lot of nutrition as well.
Yes, and if you go back...
That's one of the innovations that he was recognized for. He used, and of course, this came from his connection with Carlos Gracie. So that's what sparked the interest initially. But then he went on to scientifically also try to find the answers of the whys. Why should we eat this way? Why should we eat that way? And he used that in his pre- and post-surgery protocols.
Correct. And if you go back to 1968, our father was, before he turned 30 years old, you can already find full-page articles in the Brazilian newspapers about his trajectory, interviews with him, where he's talking about nutrition, he's talking about fasting, things that are becoming popular right now. More than 50 years later, he was already talking about them back then.
Yeah, and what is important to know is that back in the day, let's talk a little bit about our father as a young teenager at the Academia Gracie. Our father was just a student, right, among so many students. He was there. He had private lessons. He was part of also the training. It was more just a group training session. He was able even to participate in one of the teams, and he fought representing the Academia Gracie in the Maracanãzinho a couple times, I think. He also fought some tournaments for his university. And
judo. He was part of the university judo team.
But what was happening, for example, in the Academia Gracie, was in many ways there was a separation between the amateurs and a few of the professionals, especially it was a group of teachers like Carson Gracie at the time, João Alberto Barreto, Hélio Vigio, even Hobson, and our father, and some others as well. And our father used to tell us that he would be always trying on the lookout to see what were these guys doing, right? And he noticed that they were drinking these smoothies and that they were eating these fruits, the figs he used to talk about, with, you know, some special, more natural cheese, and how they were talking about, you know, combining foods. And actually, I think that his gateway to learning a lot was the fact that eventually he became very close friends with some of Carlson's sisters.
Yes.
He became very close with them.
Carlos Gracie's daughters.
Carlos Gracie daughters. And through them, he was actually invited to go to their house in the mountains in Teresópolis. And of course, spending a whole weekend, that's where he started to learn about, and it really sparked his interest and his curiosity. And I think that later on in medical school, that's when he was really able to further his knowledge and to develop a lot. But anything else from this time period? Of course, we're trying to just pick and choose what's more important, because we could talk for hours. But anything, Joaquim, that comes to your mind?
No, I think those are all. You know, sitting here and listening to both of you tell these stories, it reminds me of, you know, sitting with him and listening to these stories, always in a format of lessons, right? Of ways for us to be able to apply that into our routines, and how important it is when we would go with him to visit, you know, another martial arts school, a judo place, or, you know, he used to, back in the day, we used to go to some boxing schools, and he wanted us to pay attention, and he would always describe how he was so dedicated of a student to try to get as much information when he was training at the Academia Gracie at the time.
And I think we have to talk about our father as a maverick, as a nonconformist, as somebody who didn't really follow norms and always found his own way.
As a fighter, no?
As a fighter.
And like fighter in the sense of never giving up. And let me just share a couple more stories, and then we'll move on from his youth. Our father talked a lot about this. He had this huge family from the Northeast originally, but, you know, most of the Valente family, at least the close family members, moved to Rio de Janeiro and to São Paulo, to Santos.
Yes, where we spent vacations as a child.
Yeah, and our father was a very frail. We're a little bit bigger and taller, a lot bigger and taller compared to him, especially when he was young. Mm-hmm. He was very frail, very lightweight. We became a little taller than he was, and he suffered a little bit. We forgot to talk about the Valente story.
Name,
so you're going to talk about that in a second. But so some of the experiences he had really shaped who he became. And one of them was with a cousin, and I'm not going to talk about names, but one of his cousins, I think maybe was 1 or 2 years older, and they would always gather for summer vacation in Santos. And this cousin would beat him up, right? A couple times, beat him up and abuse, bully, like size-wise, and take advantage of the fact that he was bigger. And our father started training, right? Especially, I think, when he started training jiu-jitsu. He prepared for, 6 months just to beat that cousin. Yeah. And eventually, they went to Santos. The cousin thought that he was going to again take advantage of the situation, and our father now was equipped with jiu-jitsu and easily dominated and gave his cousin a lesson that his cousin never forget. They became friends later, but he always talked about that, how, yes, one day you might lose, but fight's not over, right? You lost the battle, you didn't lose the war. Go prepare, find ways, and then come back and overcome that challenge. And also his introduction to the Academia Gracie, where there was also some kid in his neighborhood in Copacabana who was doing the same, had maybe beaten up a couple times. And when he joined the Academia Gracie, I think it was even with João Alberto.
Yes.
Eventually, I'm sure Edvige was involved as well. João Alberto and Edvige were just a little bit older than our father, right? So our father is 13. These guys were instructors. They were probably, 15, 17. And so João Alberto told us this story. Again, our father had told us, but he gave us details recently, how he prepared our father. And then he went with our father to the area where all these kids used to hang out. And he organized a little challenge match in the street on asphalt. And our father was able to hold his own and I think overcome that challenge as well.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. And that's why he started training in the first place, because as you said, he was skinny, he was not very big, and then people would make fun of him, especially because of his last name. Our last name, Valente. Are you really brave? Because Valente means brave. So he would have to always fight, and many times he would lose and get overpowered by stronger kids.
even though Vovô Silo, our grandfather Silo, told him that and instructed him to say that if somebody asks, "Are you really brave?" Just in the name.
Yes, but it's much easier to say that when you have physical confidence
Correct.
than when you're doing it out of fear.
Yes.
So he started to learn how to fight, and that served him very well. But I think that's important, and that really shaped him, the reason why he started doing jiu-jitsu, right? And that always left him with a little bit of a chip on the shoulder in a good way, in a sense that he was always ready to fight. Yes. And he never let anybody get away with anything, bullying him or insulting him, or he was always ready to fight.
Yeah, it was a different mentality.
Yes.
I think that mentality came because of all the situations that he went through. You know, I feel that with our dad, everything that he conquered was based on his hard work. Obviously, you know, our grandfather was an amazing human being, and our grandmother also. And, you know, I'm sure he felt very privileged to be able to have everything that he had. But he was a very hardworking man. And, you know, talking about how he was, you know, so advanced for his time with the nutrition part and bringing that together with the plastic surgery, that also went very hand in hand to the way that he built his clinic. I think that's where he started, you know, having that passion for building. His first clinic and his second clinic were examples of, you know, the quality of service of things that today, when you go to a nice hotel, you really feel that, you know, you had that. Especially on the last clinic that he had, where he was fully operational.
Third.
Because he started with the
one right next to João Alberto Barreto.
That's the first one.
First one.
Second was Anita Garibaldi.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the Anita Garibaldi.
Okay, perfect.
That's the one that he had full service. And right? It was a fully
I thought you were
operational.
talking about Ashkuha.
The one he did as a private clinic.
No, that one he did in the end just to be able to have something.
But that was amazing too.
Amazing too, yeah. But it wasn't a fully operational.
Yeah, what we're talking about is the fact that, so our father started with a small office, regular, what you would expect.
But still made an amazing construction there.
Yes. And then he bought a house. He was able to buy a house in Copacabana.
Very prominent neighborhood.
Very prominent neighborhood. It's a building that's still there and that he left for us. And he built an amazing clinic that's where he implemented all the.
And when you say clinic,
but then clinic in English, it's
in
center.
English, that was a full surgical center, which you know, most plastic surgeons nowadays don't even do that, right? They would go to a surgical center to
a hospital
or surgical centers to do surgeries.
We thought you were mentioning what our father did when he retired. He actually built in the premises of our home in Rio. He built a whole structure also to still have the ability to operate. It wasn't a full surgical center, but he
do
could
small procedures.
Small procedures,
and there was an OR there.
Yeah, and he had a you know, his office with all his files and everything. So that was But go ahead.
No, so you know, his love for building, I think, was really present in that. And I remember going to friends' homes, and as a young kid, and they would say, "Oh, Joaquim Valente, how are you related to the doctor, the plastic surgeon, Pedro Valente?" I'm like, "It's my dad." "Oh my God, he's the best plastic surgeon. You know, I did my nose. You know, my mom did her nose. My friend did her nose. He operated in the whole family." You know, the service in your dad's clinic was amazing. The quality of the food, you know, the smoothies that you would be able to have after surgery. So, you know, that's something that I think if there was one quality on my dad that everyone was able to be a testament in which he met, and that until today that they speak with so much passion about, you know, the friendship and whatever kind of relationship they had with my dad, if it was professional or as friends or, you know, professional in so many different areas that he worked. They said, your dad was one of the most dedicated and passionate people that I ever met. Yeah. And that was in soccer, that was in plastic surgery, that was, you know, in his public office, that he held positions in public office, that was in horseback riding, right? In so many different areas. And I think we should talk about this at the same time, right?
Yeah. Yes, there's an expression in Portuguese that's polyvalente.
Yep, I think it's polymath.
Okay.
One of our students, Simon, sent me he watched something that we actually recommend. We have it on our YouTube channel, an interview. Maybe we can even put a little link. There's something that sometimes we can do that. Our friends will help us. A little button, or so it would be coming up here somewhere. But an interview of our father, and he invited Hélio Gracie and Martinho da Vila, who's one of the greatest MPB samba artists in Brazilian history.
And a reporter.
And a very famous journalist who I had the chance to reconnect with, Sidney Rezende. And the three were helping Dulce, forgot her last name. Monteiro interview our dad. And it's about an hour long. It's called 59 Minutes. So you can really see, this was in 1989. And our father was already connected with so many different activities.
So the interesting is that polyvalente in Portuguese, Pedro Polivalente, is like polyvalente has our last name in it. So it fits my father, and a lot of people would call my dad Pedro Polivalente. So yes, it's an amazing life that he lived, and everyone was always very...
Yeah, it's polymath. That's what it is.
It was very...
A polymath is an individual whose knowledge spans a substantial number of subjects, known to draw on complex. So,
and that's what I felt about my father. He knows about everything. Like, I always was surprised with it. How can he know about so many things and be so good in so many areas at the same time? Does his day really have 24 hours like ours? How is he able to do so much? And that's what Joaquim says. He was so passionate. He was so dedicated. He had so much energy, right? Because you can't do all the things that he did without energy.
He had a notebook next to his bed, on his bedside table. And anytime he woke up in the middle of the night with an idea, he wrote it down. And as soon as he woke up, he attacked that list.
Yeah, if we think about our father's philosophy, to me, the first thing that comes to mind is the value of hard work. That's what comes to mind first when I think of our father, right? He encouraged us to work hard. He felt that, Grandmaster Eddie always said, sorte é merecimento. Luck is something that you must deserve. It's merit.
It's merit.
Based on merit.
Yeah.
Then
who said that?
Grandmaster Eddie would say that a lot. Our father would then complement by saying, e mérito se conquista com trabalho. And merit comes from hard work. Right? So he believed that if you that you had the ability to change your life through your work. He felt that nothing was impossible. He would say, the possible, I do it immediately. The impossible might take some more time.
Yeah, the phrase on that I remember that he would always say was, nada vence o trabalho.
Exactly.
Nothing beats hard work.
Correct.
You don't remember this possible, impossible one?
No, this one and that he said first, which is sorte e merecimento. No. I didn't know that it came from Grandmaster Hélio.
Yes, he would give him credit for that.
Yes. Yeah. No, but you don't remember him talking about the possible, I do it immediately, the impossible.
Yeah. I even put it in my yearbook.
Yeah. No, this is important. We have to talk about these things because sometimes we heard one more than the other.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because...
I use this all the time.
Joaquim and Pedro were born, 12 years apart? Mm-hmm. Was it 12 years?
Yes.
12 years apart. So we grew up in different stages of our dad's life, even though he had you already for today's standards, it's not old, But back
the
in the
time.
for the time, he had you when he was 37 years old.
36, 37.
36, 37. So, and he had Joaquim when he was 50.
Yeah.
Yes, 49.
49. So it's interesting. And back in the 1970s, the late 1970s, early 80s, when I was born, our father was still very active as a plastic surgeon, even though I think his prime as a plastic surgeon was in the 70s. And eventually very involved. 1980, he was very involved. 79, 80, he was very involved with Vasco da Gama, a very prominent soccer team in South America.
It's funny because 79, I thought you were going to say horseback riding, but you're right, Vasco also. The peak of his involvement with Vasco and horseback riding was the same. It was 79, 80.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it was the peak also.
Vasco da Gama is the equivalent of the Miami Dolphins. It's just that in Rio we have like 4 of them in the same town, so it creates great rivalry. And in 1980, Vasco was a top team.
Yes.
When I lived in Brazil, it was also a top team. Lately, it's not doing very well. But horseback riding, our father had a horse that qualified to the Olympic Games. Our father had a horse that qualified to the Pan American Games.
My father had a horse that was world champion in 1983.
And he went to the Buckingham Palace. No, actually, no.
It was not at the Buckingham Palace.
I think it was in Gstaad in Switzerland.
Where he met Prince Philip.
Prince Philip, who awarded my dad and
the rider,
Elizabeth Assafi, who also taught us how to ride horses. A great champion, the first female to win the Brazilian
national championship 2 times in a sport that women and men compete together.
And that my father loved that.
And our father was her trainer.
My father, that came from the sense of, I think, jiu-jitsu, something that Hélio Gracie loved, the underdog.
And our father was extremely competitive.
By the way, Hélio Gracie, just as to talk about, we have to talk about Hélio Gracie when we talk about our father and this concept of the underdog, right? Our father really liked the underdog. Sometimes even to the point where you would say, wow, he's really a rebel. But it's not just a rebel. It's jiu-jitsu teaches us that. We want the weak. We want the person that's weaker to beat the stronger.
Yeah,
it's just and also what Pedro said earlier, right? Not going with the current where everyone wants. No. So if everyone is going that way, hold on, let's check. Maybe it's better to go to the other direction.
That was part of his personality, big time.
Yeah, never believing the hype.
Yes.
Right? My father used to say, it's a phrase in Portuguese, né? Quando avistares gigante...
A sombra de gigante.
Sombra. Quando avistares, we'll translate it. Quando avistares a sombra de gigante... Olhai a posição do sol.
Porque pode ser anão.
So, translate, please.
So, when you see the shadow of a giant... watch the position of the sun, because it might be a dwarf.
Correct. Never believe immediately what you see or what others want you to see.
And that's something that we learned from our father also, to be skeptical, not to believe everything that is in front of us, to check everything very well. Because as he learned from his father, as armadilhas são terríveis.
Yeah, the traps are terrible.
Exactly.
Yeah, many traps around.
So you have to always be alert, be aware. And then he also, one other aphorism that he really liked actually comes from the Bible, orai e vigiai. So that is the connection between the importance of spirituality, prayer, but also that's not enough. You must be spiritual, but you also must be aware and active and ready to defend yourself. Vigilant.
Yeah, and our father was very humble, right? Our father was very humble. Of course, when he believed something, he would go all the way.
He was confident, he was full of conviction, and he was humble, which is very difficult to have those 3 characteristics.
So our father, in many ways, you guys say that about me, that I hedge a lot. Our father he was very careful not to put himself in any position where he would allow or give someone a chance to attack him.
Correct.
Because our father respected the law of the Wild West, right? He respected it, and I think we should touch on this. Our father was this highly academic person, right, that studied in the best institutions of the world, a doctor, and he was a real doctor, right? He was an old school plastic surgeon. He was doing reconstructive surgery, accidents, and he was
Cancer.
treating all kinds of
And was always studying. Right?
always studying.
Never stopped studying.
But at the same time, our dad was very connected with the realities of the street.
Because he saw a weakness in academia, he saw a weakness in the intellectual worlds. He
In
saw
the country clubs of the world.
Correct. He saw a weakness.
He was part of the country clubs and he enjoyed it. And of course, he made great friends, but he saw the weakness.
Correct.
And well,
And that connected him to the street element.
correct. And he connected through music,
Yes.
right? Portela,
Correct. Samba.
jiu-jitsu, of course. Jiu-jitsu at
Correct.
the time, I think even before, just being involved, having to deal with fights in the street and having to defend himself in the street. Growing up in Copacabana in a building and being in the street all day.
And it goes back also to what you talked about earlier, that our father, he liked the underdog. Our father hated injustice.
Yes.
He hated injustice. And another quote, our father loved aphorisms, right?
Yeah. So what's the quote? I know already. Worse than?
Yes, worse than. So worse than committing an act of injustice is to accept injustice. Because you might commit an act of injustice due to ignorance. But to accept injustice is always an act of cowardness.
So this is a perfect setup for what I would like to now talk about. And that's why I started with, this notion of, maybe hedging or being humble and really not wanting to put yourself in a position that you might have to fight. Because if you're going to fight, you're not going to stop, right? You don't start the fight, but if the fight starts, you finish the fight, right? You agree that our father lived by that a lot? So our father eventually, as a very prominent plastic surgeon, very successful plastic surgeon, operating, he had, I think, over 11,000 operations, plastic surgery operations, private surgeries. And he accepted getting into politics. I think we should talk a little bit, even go back to his university days and how that started.
Yeah, as you said, our father liked the underdog and our father hated injustice. So he hated social injustice. What do I mean by that? Sometimes in the country clubs that he was a part of, in the elites, he felt that there was some discrimination towards people with less money. And that's something that he did not like. He despised that. And also any type of racial discrimination, racial injustice. And so he was connected with political movements at the time that he felt would fight against these injustices.
Even though he came from a more conservative background as far as the family.
Correct. And so this is something that he always carried with him. And in the 1980s...
No, hold on. I think
Okay.
it's important to mention that his school,
Correct.
I think that's what really influenced him, his university, the medical school, the Faculdade Nacional de Medicina,
Yes, they
was
also-
known for being a very
Yes,
socially active.
correct.
Institution.
And fighting for these causes against social injustice, against racial injustice.
So to the point, our father graduated in 1963,
Mm-hmm.
right? His medical school. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
In 1964, there's a huge political change in Brazil. And of course, at the time of the Cold War. And the military regime
Took over.
What's the proper way of saying that nowadays?
There was a military
Intervention.
intervention.
Correct. And this university was eventually destroyed.
Yes, they actually destroyed the building itself. It was a beautiful building
Beautiful building.
in Rio, and it was destroyed because they felt that it represented certain ideas.
And there was some incidents there that
Yes. But the thing is that we also must say that even though our father had that, he always was a great admirer of the United States of America. So much so that his medical training, also in the early 60s, was in America, great part of it, in New York City. And also the fact that later he would send us to study in American universities. And before that, he put us in the American school in Rio. So he felt that in America, people had the ability, the underdog had the ability to come out on top, that the American dream was real. He always admired the American dream. But that shaped, as you said, that rebel spirit that he had, and that sentiment of not accepting injustice made him in the 80s join the governor of Rio in helping him improve the situation of public health in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and later transportation. And he had some great achievements. For example, the Sambadrome, the Sambódromo in Rio, which is one of the most important structures where the carnival is held every year. That came from our father and his connection to people from the samba world, from Mazinho, from Portela, and how they had this idea, and they brought this to the governor to build this place for the celebration of carnival and the expression of what our father felt was the richest and most important cultural expression in Brazilian culture.
And this time period, Joaquim, is really unbelievable. Something that, especially for the time, was very unique. Our father went to the country club. He went to the equestrian club, to Ipica, right? And maybe for the day. And at night, he would go to Portela.
Yeah, in
the outskirts or in
Rio,
the
in the
poor areas.
The poor areas, correct.
Right? And he was able to navigate these very different worlds in a very, very positive way.
And in many ways, he would bring
natural way.
And he would bring them together.
And that's what I was going to say. And our father, and maybe he is not given the credit for that, even though I've seen some articles, he would always talk about one of his friends at the time, Becky Clabin. Mm-hmm. She also was doing that, but he would say that he was the first one. They had apartments very close to each other in Ipanema. Yes. And he was bringing the artists from these poor neighborhoods. At the time, there was a huge separation, right? Carnaval wasn't what it was today. Yes. Right? Carnaval was more for the poor Correct. People only. And our father brought these worlds together. I think that he has a huge role in the Rio de Janeiro cultural history as well.
And that's how we grew up. I remember how when I was a kid, he encouraged me to become friends with people who are not so privileged economically, financially. He wanted me to live in those circles. So we learned, like another quote that he always said, that he wanted us to learn so much, and he always said that, ovo não nasce em geladeira. How many times you heard him repeat that throughout the years? Meaning, eggs are not born in
they don't come from the fridge.
Yes.
The egg doesn't come from the fridge.
Yeah, somebody has to go get it.
Yes, you have to understand where it comes from, and he always talked about
Appreciate.
That. But Joaquim, so, of course, it's already a long episode. But then, so he opened himself to politics, and even though he wasn't a politician,
no,
he was a secretary of health.
He was friends with the governor. He admired the governor.
Which he met through jiu-jitsu.
Correct.
That's very interesting too.
Yes.
Yeah? Yes. He met through jiu-jitsu at the time the governor. Years before that, even it was before the military intervention. He met the governor through a contact. The governor needed 2 young guys that were good fighters to help him out and to be with him.
Yes.
And they selected Robson,
yes,
Hansel's father, and our dad.
Correct.
And they were, at this time, they were great friends, and they were together. And eventually, after the military intervention was over in the 1980s, and this politician came back
from exile.
Yeah, Leonel Brizola, and that's when he invited our father to. And it was very interesting because our father was very close with the military.
Correct. Our father, he was friends with everyone, and he navigated all those worlds, and
which he also became in many ways, not just through jiu-jitsu, but he became friends with a lot of the elite of the military, the Brazilian military, through jiu-jitsu.
Correct.
But through horseback riding, of course, and as a doctor. And what was interesting is that when this politician comes back from exile, my father's then already a very prominent doctor.
Yes.
And that's actually what helped him also with his jiu-jitsu trajectory. Because my father eventually became this huge doctor, very famous doctor, very recognizable figure in Rio de Janeiro, not just a plastic surgeon, but very close to politics, but also close to professional soccer, close to samba and all these different activities. And this, I think, in many ways contributed to his friendship with Grandmaster Hélio and Carlos.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because they were so proud of him, right? He used to be this young kid training at the school, and then they became very proud of all his success, and that definitely made them closer.
But Joaquim, so...
And our father became a trusted doctor for them as well.
Yeah. And this happens many times, right? You see many examples of this, but as our father got older, I think he became maybe a little bit more conservative in some ways, always a rebel, always fighting against injustice. But then something happened, and you were part of it, right? Our father, well, our house, we were not there anymore, but our house was invaded at night.
Yeah, because, he was someone that his social views of things that mattered for him, like we spoke about earlier, right? Justice and racial and all those things that were so important, and he always fought for that, were in many ways, used as a card for votes in Brazil. But Rio became a city that was completely, taken over by crime. And we lived through those years. And my dad always helped the community close to our house, which was in the mountains of Rio, in the hills.
In the hills, yeah, close to the Christ.
Close to the Christ. And he always offered
Corcovado.
He always offered his medical support, and
we grew
for
up
all
playing
festivities, Christmas, all the festivities, he always helped out and contributed with the community. And one day our house got invaded by these, drug dealers who were also, invading homes and terrorizing people's lives. And that was a big shock for him because he never expected that was going to happen.
And were these guys
in our neighborhood? And they were from the community. They were from a community very close to us. So after that time, his strategy became, I need to protect myself and protect my kids and it was me and my sister at that time living there, so that this doesn't happen anymore at the time. And I think we spoke about the story already. We thought about moving to Miami, and we decided to stay, I think also in his spirit of let's fight until the end, even though it was 100% understandable. Pedro and Guy were living in Miami ready for us to come here. But Joanna was competing horseback riding, and I was also, in school, and I didn't want to leave, so we decided to stay. And after that, his tolerance for crime and for, these drug dealers that were committing terrible things in Rio became basically zero. He had no tolerance. And understandable, because we were living in a war in that city, right? They were killing people, they were assassinating people, they were, carjacking, kidnapping. There were all kinds of crimes going on. And if we were going to stay there, we had to be prepared to be able to fight that war. And he made sure that we were practicing shooting, that we were training, that we had, our house became very fortified to be able to defend against crime. And I think that was part of his shift. And I wouldn't even call it a shift, because I think our dad was always a conservative man. It's just that at that time he got more involved with paying attention with topics that were so connected with our ability to live.
And it's hard to define our father, right?
Those guys never
conservative, not conservative.
Conservative,
yeah.
I think, is also a word that's very hijacked nowadays. So
yeah.
And those guys never came back, right? The ones that invaded the house.
They never came back, because right after that they tried to rob a deputy chief of the Rio police and one of his officers, and they were in a shootout. And in that shootout, they killed one of the officers, and I think the deputy chief also.
Yes.
They both killed about, I think, 4 of the guys that had come to the house to rob our house. And because they killed these police officers, the whole police force of Rio made sure that, you know, in a matter of 24 hours, he was found and dealt with.
Got it. So, Pedro, you were saying something interesting. I think Joaquim said that conservative.
Yeah, no, I was saying that it's very hard to label our father, you know, with the liberal, conservative. He was, as we're trying to describe him, and he had so, you know, I've talked to people about people who know him very well, and everyone has a very hard time putting him in a...
Yeah, he was, what is it in English? Inconformado?
Yeah, nonconformist.
Nonconformist.
And he had his own way, very unique, with a very particular code of morals and ethics. And
it's very interesting because Rio de Janeiro, for us, it was very important to grow up in Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro is a great city. We love Rio de Janeiro. I haven't been there in a long time, but you know, I think that our personality, our core is really based on having grown up in the city of Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro is a melting pot. Rio de Janeiro connects rich with poor. Rio de Janeiro connects all kinds of walks of life in very small places. And we had that experience. I think our father really took advantage of that, of those benefits of growing up in Rio de Janeiro. I think that many times children who have maybe a little bit of money through their parents and they grow up in certain areas, even here in the United States, you're so disconnected from other worlds, from other realities. Mm-hmm. And I think we knew what it was like.
Yeah, people say, like, you know, so-and-so grew up in a bubble. I think, you know, we never grew up in a bubble.
Yeah, in Rio de Janeiro, you really can't grow up in a bubble, right?
Sometimes exactly. I think you can.
Some people do.
That's true. It's hard because... Yeah,
you see it, but you try to hide
just that
from it.
Yeah. Our dad, and I think it's different.
I think maybe different. It changed. Maybe in the 80s, it was harder. You could still, of course, you know, it's different.
It was in different ways for all of us.
We were also very privileged.
But my dad always...
No, but our father, he made sure that we understood other people by living through them. And other people were kind of closed in a bubble. And
maybe some of these guys that invaded our house had played soccer with us when we were kids.
Yeah, correct.
And I think that's why our father was very disappointed.
Correct. It's funny. I had never thought of this before. When you explained it, it made total sense to me. And growing up, our father, he had this idea that they're not going to come here because I understand them and I'm not the criminal element.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is something that happened in Rio a lot. That's where I was going to. I was getting to. These organized crime families, or it's not a family, but these gangs, these factions, they even protected the areas back in the day.
Correct.
That they were in because they were in the business of selling drugs, so they didn't want attention to that area. But so Rio changed, and that's something that we invite our friends who like this topic, and there are movies about it.
Sure.
City of God. Elite Squad.
Correct.
So that's a lot of what was going on in Rio. But at one point, even this organization broke down.
Completely.
Right? There was first Jogo do Bicho.
Yes.
Right?
Illegal gambling.
It was illegal gambling. And of course, these that was more similar to the mafia. Mm-hmm. They controlled, they organized. And
but it's a mess. It has always been a mess. Yeah. It was always separate. Right, the mafia, like what you can call the mafia, always try to control, you know, the drug cartels, but they were never able to do it 100%. Rio is a mess.
Yes,
it's a nice mess. You know, some people like it more than others. There is different ways that you can visit Rio and get to see Rio. You know, you can have an amazing. I think it's the most beautiful city in the world. There's, you know, nature-wise, there's no place like that.
Beautiful culture, beautiful people.
But if you go there, you gotta know where you're going.
No, but going back to our father and his philosophy,
I think we should already start wrapping up. And
this is a good
way to wrap up.
Good closing, right? How he believed in honor and responsibility. He said, a mulher de César não basta ser honesta, tem que parecer honesta. He always told us, don't embarrass yourself.
But what does that mean?
Sorry. Caesar's wife, it's not enough for her to be honest. She must appear honest.
Yeah, and he wasn't just talking about women.
No. That's
Using
for
that,
us.
Yeah.
Never embarrass yourself. Never do anything that's going to dishonor yourself, your family. So he had, even though our father had a great sense of humor, he was a jokester in many ways, but he knew the importance of being serious and the importance of having personal responsibility. And that's something that he gave to us. He instilled this in us. Don't embarrass yourself. Always protect your good name. One wrong attitude can tarnish an entire generation. That's another quote that he liked. So he taught us to have personal responsibility. And that's something that we're going to carry with us for the rest of our lives and something that's going to affect generations to come in our family.
And Pedro, I have to mention this, and of course this could trigger another few hours of discussion, but without getting into much detail, our father was he believed in freedom, right? Something that now maybe today is a lot more accepted, but in all of his relationships, even as a father, our father was extremely present, but in some stages of his life, especially when we were younger, without being there physically, right? Even at the time when there was no cell phone. So he could be in Europe, he could be anywhere in Brazil, but he was present.
Yes.
He was calling, he was checking. Of course, our mom and him at the time worked very well together.
Yes.
Right? Our mom really bought into his ways. But our father was always free in every aspect.
Way. He didn't accept any type of barrier, any type of control, and often he was misunderstood because of that.
And he was but he was always open about it.
He was honest.
There were no lies.
Yes.
Right? Did he make mistakes? Yes.
Sure.
Right? And he, I think, he knew about them.
Yes.
But what you said reminded me of this, because of course our parents eventually divorced, but our father was never a liar.
No, he lived a different lifestyle.
And he talked about trust also, again, that this word is so important for him. And he talked about it, comparing it to a crystal or to a diamond.
Crystal glass.
Yes, or a diamond or a glass. And he talked about the fact that if there's a scratch, it's very difficult for it to be.
And if it breaks, it cannot be put together again.
So, yes, did he make mistakes? Yes. Even though he said many times that he would try to make very little mistakes.
And he wanted us to be better versions of him.
And I think we need to talk about that for at least a few more minutes, because that's important.
The memory card is about to end space, so we got to do it quick.
So
we can do it quick.
So maybe next time we talk about it. I think we could talk about that. And we can talk about how sometimes you have to break family cycles. And it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah.
And even though our father did not do the diet perfectly, he taught us how to eat better.
Correct.
I think that's an episode. Yeah. I think that deserves to be an episode.
Even though our father liked maybe to have some drinks,
and he
taught us not to drink.
To finish my participation, one of the most valuable things that I have is a little paper with his handwriting, where he wrote, "One of the greatest accomplishments of my life is that my children have my qualities, all my qualities, without my flaws, most importantly, my short temper."
Well, we hope so. Thank you so much. This was a very important episode for us. We hope you liked it. Please share it, subscribe to the channel if you're still not subscribed, turn on the notification bell, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.